So I will call this meeting of the full Committee of Ways and Means to order. We don't have a very long agenda, but we're going to vary from what we generally do at the full committee level today just because of the time of the session and hear public testimony, which we generally don't. And I want to thank the committee members for being here with us today. And the chair, does anybody with the committee have any business of interest to the committee before we begin our agenda? Okay, the chair recognizes that the minority leader from the Senate, Senator from Middle Georgia, and my good friend Senator Brown, to tell us about Senate Bill 118, please, sir. Right here. You can either sit, whichever is your preference, sir, there or a seat. Either one is fine.
This is fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amendments Committee. Senate Bill 118 is basically what this bill does is say that if you are serving on the board of a tax assessors, that you would not be eligible to be employed by that board for a period of 1 year after having served on the board. And what happened in this situation, Mr. Chairman, it arose out of one of the counties that I served where there was a member on the board who, at the time that served on the board, voted to fire the assessor and then took the job. And so that was seen as somewhat of a conflict by a lot of people in the district. But there was nothing to prohibit that. And so that's essentially what this does. And I understand that ACCG has an amendment that they are concerned about. And I don't see how that amendment does any harm to this bill.
Okay. Are there any questions for the author, the leader of the Senate? Anybody have any questions? Yeah, number 28, is that Representative?
Could we see that amendment from ACCG? I believe it directly affects one of the counties that I serve. Or is it already incorporated into?
It's actually incorporated into a sub, and it's the last line of what you have in your folder. This paragraph shall not apply to any person who is serving on a county board of tax assessors on July 1st, 2010, or who has served on the county board of tax assessors between June 30th, 2009 and July 1st, 2010.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have any questions about that? Or
no, sir.
Okay. Chairman Sims?
Can someone explain to me why we're doing that?
The amendment?
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's a grandfather provision in here. In fact, Turner County is one of the counties. There's only two counties that I'm aware of where this is an issue, but they have an employee that would be in violation of this law right now, and this grandfathers them in. We didn't want to fire anybody because of this law, so this basically says you can't do this anymore, but we're not going to force you to terminate a current employee because they violate.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mueller, while you're still there, I understand the grandfathering, and I understand the need for that, but I would also address this to the author because I think this is a very good initiative. I think it has a tremendous amount of merit, and it certainly is transparent. But as I understand the amendment, if you're assessor now, as of July 1st, 2010, this is never going to be applicable to you. So I mean, what haven't we just pretty much gutted the bill potentially? Or am I reading it wrong?
No, this would come up. They have to renew. As far as members of the boards of assessors, they get renewed periodically, so they could not be renewed on the board. They could still be the employee, and this would not preclude them if they had served on the board of assessors in the past from continuing to be an employee of the county working for the board of assessors. It just says that in the future you can't have somebody that has been on the board of assessors become an employee of the Board of Assessors within a 12-month period. I guess it's similar to how you all do at the legislature, where they can't lobby for a 12-month period after you've been a legislator.
But what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that that's the way it's worked. I think that's your intent. I don't challenge that, but it says this paragraph shall not apply to any person who is serving on a county board of tax assessors on July 1st. So isn't that every tax assessor that out there could be an employee as long as they're serving? Because this is not applicable to them. What we're trying to prevent here is them within a year being an employee, but then we're saying this doesn't apply to the entire group of them out there. Or am I wrong?
Well, I know the situation, I believe, in Turner County is they have served in a dual capacity, and this would prohibit them from doing that once their time period has expired. They couldn't do both, but they would only be able to be an employee after that period of time.
Well, July 1st, 2010, unless I'm missing my calendar, is not here yet, right?
This is supposed to be anybody that, and we didn't draft this. This was drafted by Legislative Council, but what we were asking for is just a grandfather provision to say anybody that's currently in violation of this code section would be protected when this. So in other words, this is effective for anybody that's employed after this legislation goes into law, not anybody that's currently employed. That's what we were asking for, and I ran it by some of our folks, and they seem to be okay with it. But if there's an issue with it, that was the intent is to make sure that anybody that's currently employed is not impacted by this piece of legislation, that it only is going forward to anybody that may be employed in the future.
Would you stay, Clint, would you stay close if you don't mind? Chairman Martin?
Mr. Mueller, aren't you trying to say anybody that is an employee of the board at that time can stay, not anyone who is an assessor at that time can stay? Isn't that what you're trying to do? You're trying to protect those that are employed and an assessor at this time.
Right.
Because the chairman is correct. If you were on the board on July 1st or served between June 30th last year or July 1st, if you met that condition, even if you were reappointed sometime in the future, you could always go back and say, I met that condition and this doesn't apply to me. And that's not what you intend, as I understand it. I believe you're after that if you are an employee as of that date or had been employed within this last year, that this would not apply to your employment.
Yes, that's right.
Isn't that what, as opposed to being on the Board of Assessors, you want to change Board of Assessors to an employee of the board. I think is what you're after.
Senator, our Legislative Council has a suggestion, if you don't mind looking at that while we're going forward. 13, is that? Okay. I know Representative Peake wants to speak on this, and I've lost the order. Representative Abrams?
I actually had a suggestion, but he's probably already done it. So.
Okay.
I just had a language suggestion.
Okay, good. We'll come back to you if necessary there. So thank you. 13, I got cut off. 27, is that passed? 23 passes. 24, Representative Black. Good to have you with us.
I wanted to clarify whether there's their intent to protect a situation where the person like in Turner County, that's serving as an appointed assessor and also an employee, if they want that to continue. Because I think Chuck had it right. I think maybe the purpose was just to protect the employee, but Clint indicated that there was a situation that exists where the guy was an appointed, and I want him to address that.
I think I understand what you're saying, and I hope that's what they're working on over there. I don't think there's any objection to grandfathering in the known employee, but I think there's an objection to just leaving a hole in the statute that says if you were there on July 10th, it's never applies to you, because then we're not solving any problem. I think that's what's come up.
But there may be some situation where they want that person to continue being an appointed assessor and an employee, but I can't envision why that. And if they do, then I think you said it's defeat the whole purpose of that they've mapped out.
Right. I agree with the gentleman. Chairman Knight.
Mr. Chairman, that's sort of a follow-up of what I had was in those situations in the future where that employee again, gets reappointed in the future, are they safe? Because I know there are some of our smaller counties that probably have that dual role going forward. So that sort of same question Representative Black had.
Do you have any suggested language on how you might manifest that?
No, sir. Really just a question for either the senator or for Mr. Mueller.
Okay, well, they'll be back with us in a second. I think they're working. In the meantime, we'd like to hear from Chairman Peake. I know he wanted to speak on this bill.
Mr. Chairman, if I can defer, I'll wait till Senator Brown's back up in the same. If that's okay.
Does this take care of it?
There is one county in the state where the assessors are not appointed.
I'm sorry, somebody called. I didn't hear.
I said there is one county in the state where the assessors are not appointed. They are elected.
That's Lowndes County.
Lowndes County. I don't see whether it affects anything here.
So my question here is this when they're reappointed?
It's an interesting observation.
Because we Clint had to explain it. It was like we want to keep people here, but going forward we want term limits. So if you're reappointed and you're reappointed, then that's a new term. That's what I'm worried. It's not okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen on the committee, I just want to remind you we are working off of LC 189267S, which is a committee substitute that has been designed that had this amendment already conscripted therein. I would expect that we're going to be amending. I would expect that, certainly not directing that, but I would expect that we're going to be amending this committee sub. Does everybody understand where we are as far as this bill is concerned? All right, Leader Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council has some new language that he wants to read, and I think it would be acceptable.
Please, sir.
In lieu of the last sentence beginning on line 19, change it to read as follows. This paragraph shall not apply to any person who is an employee of the board and who is serving on a board of county tax assessors on July 1, 2010, only for the remainder of the term to which such person was appointed. So once their current term ends, then this person will apply.
Leader, is that consistent with what your desires were in the legislation? Right. Chairman Knight.
Chairman, then that goes back to I think what Representative Black had talked about in some of these smaller counties where there's a dual role there, and you've got an appointed assessor and they are an employee. What happens after this term's up and they get reappointed? Under the language that was just read, would not that preclude them in the future from serving those dual roles? But even though in some of our smaller rural counties, they may be the only option in town. I mean, are we limiting ourselves, or in some of those smaller areas or other parts of our state where the...
Who is that question for?
Well, I either the the leader or Mr. Mueller, because I know he's probably familiar with some of the smaller counties too.
Leader, would you yield to Clint Mueller?
You're absolutely right. That is an issue, but that's a policy question, and I'm not going to. I don't think ACC is going to weigh into that policy question. The question is, should you allow going forward for a person to serve in dual capacities on the Board of Assessors and an employee of the board? And we do have that in a few places. It's not very many places, but there's a few rural counties that do that. And this would preclude them from doing that in the future. It would basically say whenever their term expires, I think they could continue to be an employee, but they could not serve on the board anymore.
Mr. Chairman, follow up, and maybe this is what the Representative Black's concern, and I it is a policy decision, but I'm wondering in those few rural counties where this may be detrimental, and I understand what the senator is trying to do maybe in his area. Are we correcting something in one of these small or rural counties that it really isn't a problem or didn't meet the I guess the problem that you had in your county? And
Sure.
again, I see where you're trying to go with this. I'm just trying to make sure we're we're not hurting somebody out there that really there isn't an issue with the dual role that they serve.
Sure. Well, on this, I guess my response would be that on the board itself, you have citizens. In other words, I don't think you have to have any finite expertise to be on the board, but that employee does need to have that expertise. And so where's the greater value, to have that person as an employee or on the board?
And
That's a question.
there's probably a potential conflict of interest in being both, which
Absolutely.
I think is the wrong you're trying to right with the whole
Absolutely.
legislation.
Absolutely.
And I think I agree with you. 23, who's that? Representative Powell.
I like the language that the Legislative Council's presented, but in light of what Representative Black said about there being some elected assessors, it probably should say appointed or elected, because it said to the term to which they were appointed.
I think, as usual, the learned attorney is right. I don't think that changes the amendment at all. It just makes it better. But we might let that be the amendment. Representative Peake, how do you feel about all this?
Thank you, that wasn't me, was it? That wasn't me, I don't think. Maybe it was. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Brown and the members of the committee, Senator Brown has brought an issue that has raised its ugly head in our area, and I applaud the senator for bringing it forward and getting us to this level. So I know there, and I think this amendment does address some of the issues that have been brought up, and so I encourage the members of this committee to, I hope that we'll support this and look forward to moving it forward, and I look forward to supporting it as well, too.
Representative Black.
I'm aware of these comments that are in line with what Representative Knight was questioning about these people that basically serve two roles, and then I represent two small counties, Eccles and Brooks. And in these situations, the appointed assessors are basically county employees. They're paid, and they do assessing, even though they have some clerks that work in the office that they hire and have control over that office. The job in these counties, there's more actual work than it is supervising the office of assessors and that aspect of it. And I don't see where this would conflict, because the salary for that they're paid is as an assessor, and rather than as an employee.
Was there a question in any of that?
I just add that to address the issue that Representative Knight had brought about. I don't see where this is a problem in those situations in smaller counties.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Any other member of the committee have any questions at this point? Does any member of the committee wish to be heard on Senate Bill 118, the committee sub? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion to pass from Chairman Peake and a second from the Vice Chairman of this committee. Would you like to be heard now?
As I assume we're in the discussion period here.
We are.
Okay. Is it not that we have to move to amend first and then pass the amendment, then move to pass it as a committee substitute? Is not that the posture that we're in?
That's the posture.
Okay. And then I think my motion would be then to move that we pass the amendment first that Mr. Schroyer is trying to come up with over there. Have we got that amendment down now?
Well, I think it's...
Is that where we are?
It's amended by Mr. Schroyer and then further amended by Representative Powell. Are we still working? Okay, well, we'll suspend until we have a proposed amendment. You're right. Thank you. 27 is Chairman Williams?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, since this bill came to us already amended as a substitute, would it not be in order just to pass the bill that we got in front of us?
Well, it's actually the amendment that's in the sub that's the problem. So we wouldn't be in order, because the initial proposed amendment that is which was an amendment that's now incorporated in the sub before you, is where the flaw is that they're correcting.
I just wonder if this came to us as we was looking at it.
No, sir. It came to us as you're looking at it, with the exception that the last sentence was added in the sub.
I don't guess we have a copy of that. Probably why it's confusing to me. But thank you.
If you're confused, I'm confused as well, I promise you.
Let's just get it done.
But we're just trying to get it right here at the end. Okay, Legislative Council would, who's going to
I'm just going to move that will he give us his version of the amendment, and then we can move on at that point in time, Mr. Chairman.
Joe?
A new last sentence. This paragraph shall not apply to any person who is an employee of the board and who is serving on the County Board of Tax Assessors on July 1, 2010, but only for the remainder of the term in which such person was appointed or elected, provided, however, that such person shall be eligible to continue to serve as an employee.
That's
Mr.
fine,
Chairman,
Mr. Chairman.
at the appropriate time.
Does everybody understand first of all, is that Chairman Sims, is that your motion?
Yes, that was my motion.
Okay, now, does everybody understand the amendment? Is there any further discussion about the amendment? The amendment only we're talking about now. Seeing none, is there any objection to the amendment?
Could we get Mr. Sims to read it back to you?
If I could get it. If he'll hand it to me.
The short answer, that's no. Is there any objection to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is in. We are now in the posture of having Senate Bill 118 committee sub now as amended with a due pass motion before the committee. Is there any further discussion on committee sub as amended, Senate Bill 118?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, can we make this a new substitute with that, what would be sent into rules?
Is that right? Okay.
Okay.
So your motion is expanded to mean that the amendment will manifest itself as a new sub.
That's
as
correct.
It passes out.
That's what I want to make myself clear on.
Is there any objection on committee to that? Hearing none, all in favor of the due pass motion, Senate Bill 118 now as amended, the new committee sub of the committee sub, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. It'll be in rules. Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so glad I didn't say this is a simple little bill that does only one thing.
We thank you for your good work. Okay. Chairman Stevens, what number? Chair recognizes Chairman Stevens to present Senate Bill 409. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This really is a simple bill. It's Senate Bill 409 is the Georgia Forest Product Fairness Act. That's a long name for such a short bill. Essentially, all this does is it keeps a level playing field for the end use of forest products so that we don't inadvertently give some sort of tax incentive to the new emerging industries when everybody's competing for the same product. This particular bill protects the current 128,000 jobs in the state with an annual payroll of $6.5 billion in over 85 counties in our state. So essentially, Mr. Chairman, all this bill does is it keeps one of our oldest industries on a level competitive playing field as new industries emerge. In other words, if we give a tax incentive to one, we've got to give it to all.
Well, gentlemen, you up for questions?
Yes, sir.
23. Chair, Representative Powell.
Is there some particular incentive that's being given now that has triggered this concern, or could you give us an example of that something that the industry is concerned that may happen that has brought forth this?
Yeah, there's I believe it was Texas that introduced a bill and gave an incentive to a new industry that was coming in that had a detrimental effect on an existing industry, and all this does is to prevent that from happening here.
Are there any, I know that this doesn't apply to anything that's currently in effect, but is there anything currently in effect in Georgia that if it were, say, introduced next year as opposed to already being in effect would come under the auspices of this bill?
No. In fact, and I'm glad you brought that up, this in no way affects any of the tax incentives that are out there that affects the best legislation for jobs, porch tax credits, local abatements, quick start, or any of that stuff. It just simply says that if we're going to give a tax incentive to one industry that uses forest products as an end product, that we give it to all.
If I may follow up, it doesn't say tax incentive, it says a direct price subsidy. Does it apply to tax incentives?
Excuse me, a subsidy. I misspoke.
Okay.
Chairman May.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow Representative Powell's line of questioning, as far as what is a specific example, for instance, the raw material harvested as into something to make paper out of? Is that an example? I mean,
a good example would be the pellets that we use, wood pellets for heating. This would just say that if we're going to give subsidies to those, that we give it to all, the entire industry. Yeah, just level the playing field.
Representative Black.
I will pass. I've answered one question.
Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think maybe some clarification, the way I understand this bill, is that these subsidies are where it is going in and giving a new company specifically say, hey, we're going to subsidize 20% of that wood or forest product that you're buying. In essence, letting that new company come in here, and they're only paying 80% versus their neighbor that's been over here that's still paying 100% of whatever that market price is. And so you've got existing entities out there that are still paying 100% market price, but yet this new one just moved in and they're getting somebody paying 20% of the cost of the of the product. That's not fair or even playing field. And I think that's what this bill is designed to do, is to make sure that we're not giving some kind of government subsidy to one company to help them offset the cost of that forest product, where another entity out there is paying market price. And that would alter supply and demand. And so it's just a level playing field. And my understanding is that not only the forestry folks have looked at it. I see Steve out there, and I understand that this is a bill that has consensus among the whole industry.
Thank you for that soliloquy. Representative Battles.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as we spoke when I came in earlier, this is more of an anti-subsidy more than making sure that everyone is subsidized. This is heading off a potential problem in the future to put something in place that the competition is not even there. Do I understand that correctly? This is more of a preventive measure than it is to correct something that may be in place.
Okay, the chair would now like to recognize the former chairman of this committee and a great friend to Tax Code of Georgia, Chairman Royal. Would you please, sir, give us your thoughts and opinion of this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I think you've summed up the legislation correctly. It's strictly an attempt for legislative intent. Currently, there are no subsidies in the state of Georgia for any of these raw products. And actually, the intent is there be no subsidies in the state of Georgia. We're trying to prevent that. We believe in the free market, and we believe that this is the way to go about it, and this legislation simply provides legislative intent, as the chairman said, that provides parity if the state of Georgia ever decided to adopt any type of subsidies. They do it for everyone. But there again, the industry does not support subsidies. They'd prefer for the free market to rule. And that's all it does. And the whole industry supports the legislation.
Okay. I see no other questions. Does any member of the committee wish to be heard on this legislation? Senate Bill 409, which you all have in your file. Anyone wish to be heard? I don't see any. What's the will of the committee? I have a motion to pass and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We had one other bill on our agenda, which was Senate Bill 512, which we will hold in the committee pending further advice from the sponsor. If there's no further business come before the committee, ladies and gentlemen, we stand adjourned.